Good day, everyone. So, this paper is all about Ukraine Russia war, the trickery of global sufficiency, and manipulation of human necessities. So, this is in accordance to my previous topic, which is Deceiving the Third World, the myth of catching up development by Maria Mies. So, because basically, this topic is the integration or the application of the said perspective, especially to the contemporary issues that we know about the Ukraine and Russia war. So we know that Russia and Ukraine from the beginning of 2022, they had issue about the war, their damage, and its effects to the whole nation around, not just the neighboring countries, but also to the world. So this paper is divided into three parts. First is the introduction, and then we have the discussion, and then the conclusion. So in the introduction, I just need to give some background about the topic. So we know, as part of the environmental ethics, according to Maria Mies, that um, countries, especially Russia, as one of the first world countries, and then under is the Ukraine as its subordinate. So the territorial expansion is really a danger or a warning to every nations in the world, especially when it comes to war. According to Maria Mies, the violence, the war, environmental degradation, depletion of the natural resources, especially the ozone layer, atmosphere, and the global impact of the war that can really danger not just Russia or Ukraine, but also the different countries that it can be their allies, like US, the Quad for Japan, European Union, Australia, and other countries. So they are really depending on the first world countries from an aid, such as for the militarization. But the real effect of this war is said to be are the Paunos and the Floras should be really affected by this war. So the fault here is why are the environment can really be the ground zero or what we called the major homeless or speechless life forms are really the effect area of this war. So as we can see here on the introduction that it's really hard to catch up for all the countries that are included within this war. The environment take the pole of these premises. No, the power species have no power to prevent or avoid this war. So the question for this paper is how deep is the impact to the environment, the economic advantages, the human interventions about this war, can really the third world countries that affected by this war really catch up with the first world countries? So this is the question right now. So as I said earlier, that starting 2022, when the world is being shaken by chaos through this Ukraine and Russia war, there are many effects. So basically, not just them or the neighboring countries are being affected, but also like Philippines as part of the third world, and Russia as one of the first world country really have the control to the global economy, political influences, and the ideologies. Especially they are the good um, importers or exporters of the resources, the finished products that really being needed by some neighboring countries around them. So it can also create a conflict, not just through territorial expansion, but also when it comes to the goods and services. No, as part of the European Union, does Russia really need to do this, or Ukraine should be suffer like this and like that? So this war obviously gave a great tension when it comes to supply demand, damaging the consumer sentiments and threatening the global economic growth. So basically, when you are in the war, the sufficiency of life forms and the environment concerns are really into a matter of concern. So it's like an enormous challenge that said to be harder to escape. And most importantly, according to Maria Mies, such philosophical perspective Deceiving the Third World, the myth of catching up development. It's like a dilemma that concerns with the safety, with the some precautions, or that these two countries really cross the line when it comes to controlling all the resources outside in like the Southeast Asian nations. So they can easily manipulate or control or dominate the countries such as the newly industrialized countries, the poor countries that have greatly affect the environmental factor. So obviously they can destroy, they can limit the supplies in the industries and the other sectors. So this conflict really have, a very long lasting effect to the third world countries around them. So it has also an impact to the international relations. While US is helping Ukraine, and then Russia can get some aid from China or North Korea when it comes to the military supplies. So it's obviously seeing the importance of the allies or cooperation or partnership with the other countries, because it can really affect their stance when it comes to the global hierarchy, right? So especially the most concern with this issue is the human consequences. It is really hard for Ukraine to surrender or having a ceasefire with a war, because the effect of the human concerns, human dilemmas, the lives that we cannot return from Ukraine and then Russia, while humans are being really affected, death, poverty, some consequences. So it seems that it's really hard to escape. So ultimately, this paper will show how Ukraine and Russia ongoing chaos and the first world nations can operate or utilize their power in controlling the world's necessities, causing environmental sins and putting countries in a dark era, while harming the human lives and arising the tensions of the developing and developed countries to negotiate. So the goal is to assess the impact as the deception continues to excel living state nations into a pole of economy and security. So sa discussion, it has, I think, it's three parts. So it will show the first world and third world crisis when it comes to the economic background generally. So the gas, the oil prices hike, the farmers are scrambling to buy fertilizers, the nations are rethinking alliances, and while Ukraine really want to join NATO, and then Russia cannot resist the idea or the move that Ukraine is doing, aiding help from USA, then European Union, no, NATO is like the North Alliances Treaty Organization, to prevent militarization, etc. But still, Ukraine is really aggressive with this issue. So the conflict here is the consequences when it comes to the food and gas prices. That's now we can see shortages, the high prices when it comes to the oil, and some people are pushing into hunger and poverty. And then the second part is the deception caused by war, which is the integration of the topic that we have. So, according to Maria Miss, as an environmental activist, so more countries that were being affected by here is commonly fall into debt or seeking for loans to sustain the stability of their country's basic needs. So they are importing, and importing while paying a lot of money, doing investments and forming of alliances. So according to Powman 2017, reiterated former countries' real lack of materials to use, so they aim for partnership or cooperation in attacking or exploiting the third world countries in order to gain and fulfill their goals. So as we can see, it's really now happening in the Philippines. So that is the realistic view of neocolonialism, colonization, which is the ultimate goal is the survival concept and gaining global power and politics. So the myth for catching up development, really according to them, is impossible to happen to the third world countries, because popularly Russia, Ukraine, US, European Union, the Quad 4, and other strong nations in Asia and European continent are being dominant nowadays. And despite the geographical conflicts, so there is really uh, they can eliminate one country from the fragility of supply chain, Meron ding humanitarian crisis, cyber attacks, economic hardships, tensions in geopolitics, and the far-reaching effects of the nuclear war, threatening the environment, the effects of the nuclear bombs, the effects of nuclear warheads or militarization, and basically the economic exhaustion that it can bring to the countries, the food supply, energy supply, the refugees, the economy of each country are really into having a disrupted trade, shortage of services, of goods, the prices, and tightening financial conditions in the market. So these are some details on the economic exhaustion that is now happening to the other countries. And then last and the focus of the paper is the environmental manipulation and insufficiency. So we can see here some effects not just physically but also through health, the risk to cancer and um, precautions when it comes to the respiratory ailments. So there are some defects of the pollutants according to the environmental health experts. The effect of the nuclear war or the use of militarization, the equipment used by the military between Russia and Ukraine really can cause a dilemma to the health crisis among the thousands of lives in the conflict. Potential health impacts were also evident there. Then some wildlife are being destroyed. Explosive release of heavy metals and toxic chemicals are some effects. So not just the humans but also environmental consequences are being emphasized here. Then for the conclusion, I believe that the only solution or the only thing that we can do here to avoid this crash of development um is it's really hard for Ukraine to surrender. There are a lot of human lives being sacrificed. Human lives are having a number of deaths. Then these incursions between Russia and Ukraine, if only Ukraine did not show an aggressiveness to join NATO, Russia will not do this and do it do doing aid among countries China and part of the European Union. So the militarization and power will not like come out like this. So this incursion shows that the control and they can manipulate the international field of power and militarization. So it's like a competitive, um, a very competitive war to secure the territorial expansion, survival, and the level of trust to the alliances. So the said invasion has created immense human and environmental sufferings, as what I mentioned earlier. There are some effects when it comes to the World Trade Organization, shortages of raw materials. So in Asia, just like in the Philippines, the direct effects of the war are expected to be more limited, particularly because the price of rice remains stable, but the COVID-19 pandemic had greatly weakened the region's economy, and the economic slowdown in Europe and the United States will continue to affect it. So there are some um, dilemmas, risk, reshaping global value change. There are some changes. So when it comes to the capital, the economy is most really affected by this. So in the worrying context of catching up development meant as a myth, it's like a disease that human cannot operate or hold enough to stop the conflict. At the peak of the war, the environment is the most devastated and the real grabber of the physical effects. If there's no neutrality possessed by both parties, this will never come to an end. History will keep repeating itself, just like what happened to the World War One and World War Two. The consequences are overdone to the third world countries, while the first world can instantly survive because they have enough resources and can embrace the chaos by taking alternatives or having means, which is true. They can survive because they are really rich countries. But third world countries are suffering the effects, having the dilemmas of the war, the invasion, physically, mentally, economically, etc. So it's really impossible for them to catch up. So this is the integration of the catching up development in the Ukraine-Russia war as the integration and application of the topic. So thank you so much for listening.